What's up guys, this is the new HYPE4 Mark IIs, $400, and it pulls out almost as much detail as my $2,000 Valhallas. Yeah, the amount of micro nuances you're getting at this price is pretty bonkers. Like, if you're just looking for the best price to performance IEM, going off this unit, the Mark IIs are even better than the Top Pros. It also has an upgrade when it comes to the build and the cable, which is also very nice. They sound pretty different from the original HYPE4s, which we'll talk about later, but these are not perfect by any means because tuning wise, they can get a bit overwhelming with the sheer amount of sonic information that is presented to you. But let's start with the overall tonality first. The HYPE4 Mark IIs are very clean, clear, but has the dynamics and the crispiness in the treble to not end up like another, boring neutral vanilla set. The treble extension on these feel like it's almost never ending. Like cymbals, for example, have a extra prolonged decay, airiness with a crispy and tingly sensation to the splashes. And at mid volume, the Mark IIs are riding on the fine edge of maximum treble output without frying your ears. The audio is basically like limit testing how much they could push out like treble wise, because any more treble or volume and this is going to be overly boosted and fatiguing, which means naturally the scaling on these aren't that great because of the extra treble boost as well as the lighter low end, which means the Mark IIs are not a high volume, super crank it up kind of set. These are for mid-volume listening around 65 to 70 dBs on most songs, and definitely lower with more energetic K-pop and J-pop. You do not want to crank these up. For example, Butterfly by Luna, Spring Day by BTS, artists like Yorushika, Miss Green Apple, they feel a little bit over highlighted and a bit too bright and sharp in the imaging and with the electronic elements. I had to turn the Mark IIs down a few dBs on those if I wanted to listen for a longer period because there just isn't enough low end to balance out all that extra treble energy, and the overall sound a bit thin, bright, not full enough on those tracks, and not ideal when it comes to K-pop and J-pop. EDM can also be a hit or miss depending on the song and how much treble it has on one track or how hard the drop is. Basically, on a brighter EDM song, it's gonna be a bit too energetic. On a, I guess, like a more chill drop, then it sounds pretty fine, sounds pretty good. The drum and rhythmic section on rock and metal tracks can also feel a little bit light and lack that final impact, kick, and body to the notes. Even though these cymbals are extra, juicy and crispy with the added air and treble, it is still a bit of a toss-up depending on the song and whether you prioritize, better drums and, fuller rhythmic section, or you like a airier and crispier cymbal. However, tracks like Birds of a Feather, Twilight Zone, more slower pop tracks, artists like Ariana Grande, Billie Eilish, indie artists like Bon Iver, you got Charlie XCX, not indie artists, but Frank Ocean, The Weeknd, Lana Del Rey, they all sound very high fidelity and OCD like at mid volume on these. The Mark IIs are pretty engaging and rides the edge of that crispy and airy energy, and it gets pretty addicting on the right song. So even though there are limitations to its scaling, this doesn't mean the Mark IIs aren't immersive, because they are again very engaging, very crispy, but just in a different way when it comes to immersion and musicality. Tip wise, I am using the ultra clears, but any grippier tips would work. I found the stock silicons to be a bit slippery and doesn't stay in my ears as well as like the grippier clear stuff, but basically any tip are gonna be fine. Just don't use ones that boost the treble like the Clarions. You don't need any more treble on these. Feel free to mess around with the tips. Bassier ones will work well as well, or smoother ones like the Senkais can help tame the energy down. Tech wise, the Mark IIs have the instruments laid out clearly in front of you, and it pulls out the details from the track and have it kind of like pop out from all over your head stage, giving you that OCD pinpoint like feeling with the imaging with a very fast attack to the notes. And the details can only pop out like this because the separation from different instruments and voices are very clear and resolving, and it doesn't get in the way. The layering is fantastic, and again, when it comes to pure detail retrieval, these give my Valhallas a run for their money, which costs 5 times more. And I would put these around the same level as the Monarch Mark IVs, the Glaciers, which are both over $1,000. The main difference is that the Mark IVs are smoother and scales better while putting out the same amount of detail, and you also have the bass switch on the Mark IVs, and then the Glaciers and the Valhallas just have better bass texture, better slam, impact, rumble. But when it comes to value to performance, bang for your buck, the HYPE4 Mark IIs punch a good deal above its price bracket. Loan-wise, the sub-bass and mid-bass is well controlled, it's tight, it's quick, it's snappy, it's on the lighter side, ever slightly boosted. The texture, the resolution is great when it comes to the overall bass notes. Like, you get enough energy, and it's well separated and tucked from interrupting the mid-range and the treble to give room for the other elements, to pop out and create that OCD-like effect. The Mark IIs have enough body and no way to sound natural, but they don't have the same power and impact or heaviness, the slam when it comes to the drums, or a super deep rumble in the sub bass, and it doesn't have that thicker tonality that many of you guys are looking for. Basically, it's enough for most tracks, and they still sound fine when it comes to hip hop, rock or jazz, but I would personally like more body and fullness of the sound, because the low end can feel a little bit, too laid back and disengaged from the rest of the track, which is great if you want to hear the mid-range and the treble better, but for low end focus genres, these wouldn't be my first pick. Vocals are also similar in that they are fine, they're not overly forward but not recessed either, they're at a comfortable distance. Female vocals lean on the lighter and slightly airier side of things due to the treble boost. Sounds very sweet, sounds very angelic, and I guess you can say ethereal. But the 4 to 8K cut is also crucial to remove the sibilance and the shout that otherwise would have definitely ruined the balance if it did continue to extend because of the treble boost that comes afterwards. And again, energetic K-pop and J-pop artists can sound a bit thin, bright, unnatural, and overall the Mark IIs are not a vocal centric set. It's not a super powerful or forward vocal powerhouse like the RS5s, nor does it have great scaling and I guess that special sauce like the Arcanus. However, they are extended enough to feel open, clear, and complete. And basically what I'm trying to say is, in both the vocals and the low end, these do the job. They're not gonna wow you, they're clear, they're resolving, they don't get in the way of the treble, which is the main star of the show. So if you like something meatier, thicker, or punchier, which is more rumble in the low end, then the original HYPE4s would still be the better pick over the Mark IIs, because these simply don't have the quantity, the impact, the slam, the low end prominence to be considered like a bassy set. These are more treble focused, clean, versus the bassy all-rounder that is the OG HYPE4s. Now, performance-wise, these are a good deal more detailed as well as more energetic than the original HYPE4s. They're not peaky or anything when it comes to treble, it's just more boosted when it comes to the overall energy in the higher frequencies. The audio is using Knowles BAs this time for the treble tweeter instead of the Sonians, and maybe because it's a tuning or the driver or both, but the Mark IIs are not as smooth as the original HYPE4s, and they do have a crispy, tinglier, more sharper tonality when it comes to the treble and the notes. So if your library has a lot of hip hop, rap, EDM, rock, even K-pop, J-pop, I would still go with the original HYPE4s or the T Pros, because they're just fuller, more powerful, the impact is just much better, it's meatier, it's more enjoyable in the low end, because this is more of a treble leaning set that excels with indie, acoustics, R&B, and less energetic pop stuff. Now, versus the DUNU BRAINDANCE, these two are actually pretty similar in the overall DNA, but this is what the brain damage should have been. It's clean, it's clear, it's balanced, but it also has the dynamics in the treble for that crispiness, and it doesn't sound unnaturally thin and artificially bright. And the reason why the Mark IIs work better is because it fixes some issues on the BRAINDANCE. Number one, it has a fuller mid-bass and low end, which does help with the thinness. And number two, it's less tilted towards the higher frequencies. If you look at the graph, it's more of a W shape. It comes back down, whereas the BRAINDANCE kind of just like tilts towards the higher frequency, and it's also tamer in the upper mids, so that makes the overall energy just less bright and energetic. And lastly, number three, the Mark II in general emphasizes the treble less because of the extra boost in the mid bass and the vocals, which brings both of those regions a little bit more forward, and it shifts some of the focus off of the treble from your ears just enough to not sound artificially bright in the timbre. So all those little things combined allows the Mark IIs to stay within the region of just being too bright and artificial, and if you were to change any one of those meticulously tuned areas, then the Mark IIs would end up the same as the BrainDance, overleaning into the higher frequencies and sounding artificially too bright. Tech-wise, the Mark IIs have a slightly sharper and crispier tone and imaging to the overall sound versus the lighter and softer, thinner playback on the BrainDance. When it comes to the dynamics and the contrast, the Mark IIs are also more vibrant, more unique, I guess you can say, in the treble, and slightly more resolving when it comes to the bass notes and slightly sharper in the attack. So in terms of both tuning and technicalities, I would hand it over to the Mark IIs, and they are also $100 cheaper. The only area where I can see the BrainDance being okay in is if you want like a smoother sound. But if you do want a smoother sound, then you can just get the NICEHCK Rockies. They're the same price as the Brain Damage, but it actually comes with ESTs and sounds more natural, and just overall the better pick if you want a more smoother and I guess airier sound. Versus the Rockies, the main difference here is that dynamically the Mark IIs are more contrasty, they're more lively, they're more engaging, and I guess you can say OCD in the imaging and sauce. But that also means the Mark IIs are more energetic in the treble, not as smooth and I guess you can say refined as the Rockies. If you want something softer, more laid back, you know, easier on the ears with that misty EST tonality, but it's still well balanced, slightly airy from the ESTs, then that's where the Rockies come in. Both are very enjoyable. Personally, I lean slightly more towards the Mark II because value-wise it is better. It's $100 cheaper, but also has a better build. You can argue a better cable and better case, and a little bit more technical when it comes to the dynamics and the transients. If you never tried what a misty EST feeling is, then just go grab the Rockies for the sake of novelty. Now versus the Top Pros, tonality wise, I actually still prefer the Top Pros a little bit more because it is more vocal focused, and I am a vocals kind of guy. But basically you can picture the Mark IIs as a crispier version of the Top Pros with more treble energy, less forward vocals, and both have a leaner low end, you know, identical bass glide pretty much. And tech wise, they're also very similar with a slight edge to the Mark IIs when it comes to the overall dynamics and imaging. It mainly comes down to, do you prioritize the mid-range more? Do you want something with a clear, open, and sparkly vocals on top? If yes, go with the Top Pros. Whereas if you prefer a more, you know, treble focused playback, more air, more crispiness to the cymbals, more micro nuances in general, and you don't mind a slight hit and more laid back vocal approach, then you can go with the Mark IIs. Both are fairly similar in that they are both a clean, balanced sound. The Top Pro is more vocal focused. This is more treble centric. Then lastly, versus some all-rounders like the MK5 EST, the VOLAREs, the Mark IIs are not going to be as smooth and balanced and doesn't have the EST feeling. They come off as more energetic in the treble, a little bit sharper, less body and less rumble, and doesn't work as well for genres like, you know, hip-hop, rock, K-pop, J-pop. Those are going to sound more natural and full and complete on the MK5 and VOLARE. And as for the new MK7, I would personally just go with the MK5 EST or the VOLARE. Full review on the MK7 and the Harrier coming soon, but as for now, all you need to know is if you want an all-rounder, get the MK5 EST7. And if you're wondering why I'm not comparing it to these $300 stuff like the Canon Pros, the Pilgrims, the new DUNU 242, 142, it's because these are on another level compared to those. So I'm just gonna compare it to the $500 stuff, which is more accurate to the overall sound quality. Then finally, value-wise, it is very hard to beat the Mark IIs because they are around $200 less and actually a little bit more technical than the MK5 EST and the VOLARE, with equally good accessories and unboxing. Just that the trade-off for all the detail is that not everyone and not every song will be able to handle the extra treble energy on the Mark IIs. But if you do want a slightly treble leading sound, you know, more energetic, livelier, crispier, you know, you don't mind having a leaner low end, you have genres that work better like indie, acoustics, you know, like slower pop, rock stuff, then the Mark IIs would actually be the better overall value. In conclusion, when it comes to value to performance, the HYPE4 Mark IIs are an easy recommendation if that is all you care about. If all you care about is detail for the least you can get it for, go grab these. But when it comes to the tonality, it depends more on the library and things get a little bit trickier. Which is why I made a playlist of songs that these work great on as an example. So if you have a similar library with what's on the list, then these are an easy rec. But if you don't see any familiar names, or if those songs are just very different from what you usually listen to, then probably skip these because they might just be a little bit too bright. Aside from that, the audio really stepped up the game when it comes to value, both in the sound as well as the accessories. This is the case. It's a very good sturdy case, much better than the Monarch puck and the Valhalla puck. I don't know why they even, use the pucks, but same cable as the Valhallas. So overall value, this is pretty phenomenal if you do vibe with the overall sound. That aside, let me know what your thoughts are on the HYPE4 Mark IIs, if they are a little bit too energetic in the treble, or maybe you might just take the risk on these because they are pretty addicting when the right song comes on. Aside from that, thanks for watching guys, and I will see everyone in the next one.
Shout out to Dom Q, Rox Cat, B Urak, Disco Scaldus, Walker Standard, Patrick, User, Contain Guava Juice Gains, Mr. Gorillas, Polly J, Gis Sang Young, Christopher Jackson, Henry Claudia, Son of a Horse, 777ZK, Wizard, Obi, Treble Extended, Frickalicious, Ricardo, Tapasar, Choco Norris, Shim Bakale, Tomat, FKSRG, Cousin Fat Fat, Julius Phillip, Dead Riddle, Bilha, Nico, Addy, Michael, Trackstar, LL here, Shuri, Ryan, Raphael, I am J-Rack, Ori, June, Hakase, Torcog, Affinity, EGC, Raj, Chimika, Javir, CB952, Gilbog, Ocean 219, BC Knight, AK131, MN Gelato, Wad Joe, Yan Yan, Unbounds Armatures, Vitor Kent, Variah Q, Tuna, Edward Yu, Robert McLean, Polar, The Surgeon, Rock Guy, Drave Gaming, Shifbonky, JRX, Samuel, John Simon, Archie, Beefy Pigeon, Zeph Doom, and Peter Walton. Thank you guys so much for the support.